And there's some of the critical testimony from the neighbor who told police, hey, my neighbor, the defendant, tapped on my window around 6 in the morning and asked me to help move his wife's car. That move, the neighbor initially thought was going to be maybe around the corner to a relative's house. Turned out that it was to a nearby county. It was a 30-minute expedition, wherein after the defendant wiped down the wife's car, took items out of it, including the trunk mat, which had the blood from one of the kids on it, and then brought those items from the wife's car to a dumpster, ditches them, and then on the way back, we heard this testimony before, it's worth reviewing it again. Now that we know that we've got a conviction on all counts and the top counts nonetheless, the "I snapped" quote. Ken Belkin, LawNewz trial analyst, here along with me to discuss the case. So Ken, we're at the point where we're looking at some of the aggravating and mitigating circumstances here, because this is going to go into the death penalty phase. This is Florida. We've got convictions on all the top counts. That's second-degree murder for the wife. That's first-degree murder for the deaths of the 2 kids. The defendant standing up at the end of the proceeding and saying, yeah, Judge, I don't want my attorneys for the death penalty phase. I just want to be put to death. So we've got bad evidence. It was a horrible case from start to finish. From a factual standpoint, it was tried well, but just bad facts. A defendant now just saying, put me to death.
Well, hold on. We're going to say it's a bad case all the way through. It's a circumstantial case. That's true. Not a bad case, though. I think, look.
Well, horrible facts, I should say.
Horrible fact, egregious and horrific facts. Anytime anyone's murdered, it's horrible, especially so with children. That's why Florida legislature made the killing of children an aggravating factor in a murder case. Now look, you've got a situation where this case was purely circumstantial evidence. This guy tried to kill himself in the run-up to the trial. He wants to waive his right to counsel at the penalty phase. That's certainly his right to do so. It's not a wise thing to do at any stage in a criminal proceeding, but if he wants to die so badly, I think the state of Florida will gladly oblige him.
Well, look, is there any chance the judge is actually going to take this guy and say, yeah, I'm going to grant your request to not have counsel for a death penalty phase?
It's not a request. He can waive his right to counsel. He can certainly waive it.
Well, he could, but what's the chance of that actually happening? He's saying he doesn't want it, and then the judge said, take some time, cool down, I'll talk to you about it later. Well, when is later going to be? Wednesday is when they're planning to start the proceeding back up again.
Look, I have a sneaking suspicion that this guy with a history of gang violence or membership in gangs, and the murder of the 2 kids, they're probably going to impose the death penalty here. This is pretty egregious stuff.
It's highly likely. I'm just wondering, is he going to have his attorneys by his side starting on Wednesday? If you were to take a Ken Belkin prediction, because you like to make them, and then you like to say when you're right.
By the way, I was right. I predicted in this case he was going to get convicted on all 3 counts. I didn't agree that they had what it took to convict him on the murder of the children, but certainly the mother, I thought, because he did confess to that. But, I did feel that the temperatures were going to run hot enough that, look, they're just going to get him on everything.
Well, I think that they had enough to get him on everything, too, because how else did the daughter's blood get on the mat that he tried to ditch in the dumpster?
Well, he did try to pass the buck and say that his neighbor was responsible for the killing of the children.
Yeah, but the neighbor had no motive. The prosecutor went over this, and there's some other little tenuous connections as well in there that would suggest, hey, look, the kids didn't just automatically run away from home or something like that. They've never been seen. Their toys weren't touched. All their personal effects were left behind. The mother never touched the bank account. So, look, where else would they be?
Yeah,
and when you have one of the blood from one of them, and I think the prosecution did a great job of rolling this all together in closing arguments. And the overarching theme was the key is motive. The neighbor had no motive to kill the kids, and even the defendant's story tying the neighbor in didn't produce any evidence.
And quite frankly, I always thought the defendant was lying about murdering the children, not because of anything to do with being weary of getting the death penalty, but I think he was scared of some sort of jailhouse reprisals. It's common knowledge when you commit crimes against children that there are people in the big house that are gonna take their vengeance on you.
That's a big deal. There is a hierarchy in prison, as
and this guy knows that.
He knows that. Okay, so that's correct. I agree with your assessment there. But I'm wondering, is this going to be a strange situation come Wednesday where we don't see the counsel? Is he going to fire him at this point? And is the judge going to honor that request, or is the judge going to say, look, you need to calm down, I'm letting the counsel be here? At a minimum, the judge is going to let him sit right behind the defendant and jump in if necessary, at a minimum. But even then, I mean, you know in the rules of professional conduct that there's that loophole that if your client starts to get wiggy, then you can theoretically jump in to aid a client who's suffering from some pretty severe or questionable mental health situations or issues. And this might be one such situation.
Look, this guy, I don't know for a fact whether or not this guy was court-appointed counsel or privately retained attorney. If he's court-appointed counsel, he doesn't really get his choice of court-appointed counsel. So I have a feeling the judge is probably going to make his attorney stay on. Maybe he'll appoint someone else if there's been a breakdown in the attorney-client relationship, but I don't think they're going to let him be subject to the death penalty without having competent counsel represent him in this phase.
That's what I would suspect, but again, it's a strange situation where the defendant is just it's turning around and saying, I don't want it, I'm giving up, I don't care, I wanted to die before, I want to die now.
I had a colleague who had a federal case, and the woman went to trial and didn't want her defense attorney. She did not want an attorney. She wanted to represent herself at trial in a federal trial. And the judge made my colleague stay on as in a quote-unquote advisory role. So that might be something we see here.
We do see that from time to time. Well, Wednesday is going to be very, very interesting in the Toledo case because I'm curious to see how it's going to play out. I want to continue listening to some of the testimony of the neighbor. Again, this is a critical testimony because ultimately it's the neighbor that helped police piece together the various pieces of evidence. What if the neighbor hadn't come forward? It would have taken police a lot longer to find the wife's car, and they may never have found some of the evidence that was ditched in the dumpster. That includes the trunk mat with the daughter's blood on it, and also the children's toys, and some of the other items in that dumpster with the defendant's fingerprint on them. That was the key that allowed the first-degree murder charges. So this testimony, very, very important. Let's listen a little more and be back in a bit.
I finally reached her. I don't know after how many calls, but I finally got to her and reached her and told her like something's really going down over here, and she left her job and rushed home.
You remember what time she got home?
No.
Do you remember if the defendant was still at his house at that point?
I seen him, yes.
Now I want to back up just a minute.
Okay.
Between the time that you got home from the 7-Eleven and the time that your mom actually came home, what did you do during that period?
I went in the house. I think then I came outside. I sat on the front porch, smoked the Black and Mild. I kept trying to call my mom pretty much. She wouldn't answer. I called Courtney. She answered. I kind of briefly told her what was going on, just like just talk to somebody, let them know what's going on, and that's pretty much it. Hung up the phone.
In this period where you're calling your mom and your girlfriend, did you have an opportunity to see the defendant again?
Yes.
And tell us how that occurred.
I was sitting on my front porch, and I seen him drive past.
And as you saw him drive past, what did you see specifically?
Like he was dressed, getting ready to go for work or something like that.
Did he look up onto your porch?
Actually, he didn't look up.
When he drove past, what did you do?
I was texting Courtney, I believe, and I believe I deleted the text. Or something like that.
Why?
Because I thought like if maybe he stopped and see me like trying to communicate with somebody, like he really thought something was up, and I didn't want him to think that.
Had your mom gotten home at that point?
No, she was not home yet.
How much after that did she arrive home? And you can ballpark it, it's fine.
Okay. Probably probably an hour and a half or so.
How many police had assembled in the neighborhood at that point?
A lot. I don't know count, but there was a lot of police officers there.
Did you stay out on your front porch the whole time?
Pretty much I walked in and walked out every once in a while.
Did you want to talk to the police?
Yes, I did.
Why didn't you talk to them when they first came over?
I didn't talk to my mom before, and I wanted to let her know like exactly what was going on before I be taken off somewhere and probably questions for hours at a time, and she don't know where I'm at. And on top of that, I was pretty scared, to be honest with you.
Were you at home when the defendant was arrested and taken from the scene?
Yes, sir.
Did you see him getting taken away?
Yes, sir.
Did you talk to the police after that?
Yes.
How long after that?
Pretty much as soon as he left, we went and talked to the police. As soon as we seen him getting carried off.
Where did the conversation occur?
It occurred at my house. It's at my front room.
Inside the house?
Yes.
How many officers came into your home?
I think 2.
Who was present besides you and the 2 officers?
My mother.
What did you tell the officers at that point?
I told him about Lewis coming to my house and him come to get me, help him drop the car off.
What else did you tell them?
That was pretty much it.
Did you tell them where the car was?
Yes.
Did you tell them exactly where the car was?
Yes. It's on the Publix parking lot in Sanford.
Did you tell them anything else about the dumpsters or anything that happened there after?
No, sir.
Why not?
Honestly, I didn't want like anything to do with it. Like, I just wanted I wanted to help. I just wanted I was hoping if I told them where the car at, everything would be okay and everything would be solved. But I noticed it wasn't. So I came forth with more information to try to help out.
The first time that you talked to the case, was it still just a missing person? Excuse me. The first time you talked to the police, was it still just a missing persons case? If he does, Your Honor, I'd ask that he be able to answer the question.
I'll overrule it.
Was it still just a missing person case at that point?
Yes, I believe so. It pretty much was nothing really was figured out. It was pretty much I was still kind of wondering what's going on, you know. They couldn't find the kids or the wife, but I don't know if there's a missing person case just right then, right there.
How long did you talk to the police? Do you remember?
The first time?
Yeah, the first time that you had them in your house.
I don't really remember.
Again, more of the critical testimony from the neighbor in the Toledo case. The question now, Ken, is what could possibly be done to mitigate this crime spree? Okay, you have the death of a mother and her 2 kids, 8 and 9 years old. Is there anything that can be done to mitigate this, to try to ratchet this away from the death penalty at this point?
Look, if this guy had heretofore been a productive member of society, a loving father, someone who had a career, someone who contributed on some level in a positive manner to society, there would be mitigation, and in all likelihood, the judge would probably not impose the death penalty. I don't see that here. This is a guy who has a history of being a member in a gang. There was talk about all sorts of brutal acts he committed while he was a member of this gang, and the nature of this crime itself, the killing of children. I don't see any way out of the death penalty.
I'm just trying to figure out where they might attempt to go, because I'm struggling to come up with something. And look, you know me well enough to know that it's hard for me to struggle to come up with any argument, because I usually can come up with one.
This is true.
You know, my parents told me I did 2 things when I was a kid. I talked too much and argued too much, and look at what I do for a job.
You still do.
So, well, I had the last laugh. But I can't think of very many arguments to try to mitigate this. And I hate to think that where they might go is to engage in a little bit of victim blaming here, to say that the back and forth between Yesenia Suarez and Luis Toledo may have just ratcheted up the anger, and that's what led him to flip and try to tie that into the statement, the I snapped statement that we just listened to again, that he told the neighbor when they were on the way back from this evidence ditching expedition to the neighboring county. I mean, is it possible that could be one of the only places they have to go here?
Look, if I was his attorney, and now I'm really putting on my glasses and my magnifying glass, I would go back to his childhood. I would look at everything from his childhood up to now and mine his life for the most traumatic experiences and present this argument, that this is a man who did not become this guy who murdered his wife and her children in a vacuum. There were genuine traumas that he suffered that led him on this path and to this point. And I would try to really just mine his life for trauma and play the sympathy card as much as possible. It's not a card. You know, people don't just do these things in a vacuum. Most people.
Yeah, I think that could also be a good idea. I'm just trying to figure out, you know, how it's going to play out here. Maybe we're just reaching the conclusion that this is probably going to end with a death penalty conviction.
I mean, this guy is also not the most sympathetic human being. He hasn't displayed, aside from, you know, attempting suicide, which really, I don't know, is a display of remorse. He hasn't really displayed any remorse. When asked by the police where the bodies were, what did he say? He said, "Oh, you'll never find them." You know, come on. If you were sincerely remorseful, you would want to at least lead the police to get the bodies so this woman and her children could have a proper burial for their family.
Yeah, there's a famous defense case in the U.S. Supreme Court about the Christian burial speech. I didn't think I would ever listen to Ken Belkin give a version of that speech.
Look, it shows remorse. You know, it really does. People want to say goodbye to their loved ones in whatever manner they choose to do so.
Yes, and here we have no clue exactly what happened with the bodies. You know, there was at one point search in the area to figure out if they could have wound up somewhere in the area. Then you've got this weird letter that the defendant wrote when he was in jail awaiting trial, where he claimed he had 3 boxes shipped to Texas, 1 large and 2 small, and that his stuff, or whatever the word was, had been taken care of. You know, I mean, is that just a lot of talk, or is it possible that these boxes somehow got shipped off to another state?
I mean, look, it's possible that this psycho shipped the bodies off to another state, but, you know, no remorse. No remorse. His demeanor during the trial, a bit arrogant. He had a little bit of a cocky swagger to him. You know, this guy, there's nothing sympathetic about him. Even if you could mine his childhood for trauma, his demeanor during the trial was just horrible.
Yeah, I'm waiting to see where this is going to go come Wednesday. I'm certainly curious. In the meantime, I want to continue reviewing some of the testimony of a friend of victim Yesenia Suarez. Again, the way that this trial proceeded is that the victim, Yesenia Suarez, was the person painted with a positive perspective.
Did you know some individuals by the name of Yesenia Suarez, Luis Toledo, Talia Otto, and Michael Elijah Otto?
Yes, I do.
And how did you know Yesenia Suarez?
She was like an aunt figure to me.
Okay, and when you say like an aunt figure to you, can you explain that?
She was my mother's best friend of 10 years.
All right. And you also knew Talia and Michael Otto?
Yes, I do.
How long had you known them?
I've known them since birth, basically.
All right. How would you describe your relationship with their family, Yesenia, Mr. Toledo, and the children?
We had a very close family-friend relationship.
Okay. When you say close, how close are we talking about?
Like hanging out every other day, every week.
Okay. Would you consider them almost like family?
Yes.
You say your mother was Yesenia's best friend?
Yes.
And Talia and Elijah, did you call them by their names, or did you have nicknames for them?
Talia's nickname was either Lala, you know, Talia, and then Elijah, he was a little monkey to me, so, you know, Monk, Eli.
Okay. So you knew them well enough to have nicknames for them, and you called them by their nicknames for as long as you've known them?
Yes.
You see them very often?
While they were alive, yes.
Okay. How often did you see them?
Well, at the beginning, when they were both born, we saw them fairly a lot. Then mother had the falling out, not so much. But once they had rekindled the relationship, it was just about, like I said, every other day.
Okay.
We'd be hanging
So
out.
you knew you knew Yesenia and the children for a period of time. Then you indicated there might have been some falling out between her and your mother,
Yes.
and then their relationship was rekindled.
Right.
How long was it that they had the kind of falling out where there wasn't so much contact?
I want to say an average of 3 to 4 years.
Okay. And then how, from, let's say, October of 2013, how long had it been since their relationship was rekindled and they became best friends again?
From that time, I want to say they had became friends. Actually, I want to say about a year before then.
Okay. And your families, again, sort of would see each other, do things together,
All the time.
and see each other often?
Very often.
And when you say very often, how often are we talking about?
An average of a 7-day week, I want to say 4 to 5 days out of the 7-day week.
All right. So when you would see them, where would you be at?
We'll be at home, or they, text or call one another. You guys want to go to the mall? You guys want to go to the beach? Hang out? Want to go to Aquatica? Go to the library? Just different activities. Go to the park. Take the kids out. Hang out.
Okay. Now I want to take you to, I know that we'll hear from your mother a little bit later, so I want to take you to October the 23rd of 2013, the day that Yesenia and the children were reported missing. Do you recall that day?
Yes, I do.
Were you in school at the time?
Yes, I was.
Did you go to school that day?
Yes, I did.
When you got out of school, where did you go?
I had went to their house.
Okay, when you say their house, you're referring to Yesenia's house?
Jasenia's house, yes.
All right. Now, at some point in time after you arrived there, did you learn that someone had found a knife that may have been associated with the home?
Yes.
And did you let somebody know that you might know about it and actually saw the knife?
Yes.
Or a photograph of it?
Yes.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Your Honor, at this time, the defense would renew our objection to this piece of evidence that we've been to the entire trial.
Okay. The evidence has already been admitted.
Ms. Gomez, I'm showing you what's been entered into evidence at State's Exhibit 71. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
And you've seen this knife before?
Yes, I have.
Can you tell us where? Well, let me first ask you, when did you see that knife? Prior to seeing it on October the 23rd, 2013.
About a month or so beforehand.
And where did you see it?
In their garage. Jasenia's garage.
All right. Now, was Yesenia there at the house when you saw it?
No, she was not.
Who was at the house with you?
Louis and the kids.
All right. And what were you doing at their house at that time?
I want to say my mother had dropped us off and had them watching us for a little bit.
Okay, so your mother took you there, dropped you off,
Dropped me and the kids off. Yes, me and my little brother and my little sister.
and she and Yesenia went somewhere?
I want to say Jasenia was in the room at the time, but my mother and my father had went out.
Okay, who specifically was at the house that day?
Altogether was me, my brother, my sister, Dalia, Elijah, Jasenia, and Louis.
Okay. And so, was that in the house?
In the garage.
All right. And what brought you to going out to the garage where you saw the knife?
I don't recall.
Okay. Who was there with you when you saw the knife?
Louis.
All right. So it was you and Mr. Toledo?
Yes, sir.
And you said you went into the garage. You don't recall why you went into the garage?
I want to say he was grabbing something out of the garage, so I followed him
Okay. And where exactly in the garage did you see it?
on the toolbox.
All right. So was this something that kind of caught your eye? How did you become aware of the knife?
The brass knuckle had caught my attention.
Okay. And so what did you do when you saw it?
I had touched the knuckle part, grabbed it and asked him what it was.
And what did he say in response to that?
He had proceeded to take the knife out and showed me the knife. He didn't allow me to touch the knife outside of the cover, but allowed me to touch the knife while it was inside the cover.
Okay. So he allowed you to touch the knife while it was inside. When you say the cover, you mean the leather sheath?
Yes,
part?
sir.
Did he pull the knife out to show it to you?
Yeah, showed me what the knife looked like.
So you saw the blade and you saw the handle and all of that?
Yes.
Now, I want to take you to some period of time after October the 23rd of 2013. Do you recall seeing some news footage about some items that were covered from a dumpster by law enforcement?
Yes.
And were you later shown some photographs of some of those items?
Yes.
And what from those items, from those photographs, what you saw in the news, did you recognize?
Some of Lewis's clothing items and Thalia's teddy bears.
Ms. Gomez, you're 18 years old right now, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Remember speaking with me about 2 years ago? It's a long time. You were 16, and Mr. Will was present. Mr. Will, could you raise your hand? And there was another individual there named Mr. Ed Davis. Do you remember that?
I believe so.
Okay, he was another prosecutor. You recall that?
Yes.
Okay. And you remember me asking you questions about what you saw, what at the house, the stuffed animals and everything like that?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember me asking you questions when the last time you went over to that house?
Yes.
Okay. And you said it was probably a week before October 23rd?
Yes.
But you also told me that you didn't go inside that house at that time.
Yes.
Because Yesenia came out and gave, I guess, your mom a straightener or a hair straightener or something?
Yes.
So that's at least the week prior to October 23rd. And then Yesenia was out of town for a business trip. Were you aware of that?
Yes.
So when was the last time you were actually inside Talia's bedroom? Would that be September 2013?
Yes.
All right. Now, you mentioned before that it was a new bedroom set in her room.
Yes.
When did she get that new bedroom set?
I don't recall.
So she was in the process of, I guess, redoing her bedroom at that time?
There was no process. It was done within the same day.
It was done, got a new bedroom set
And they put it in their same day.
and moved things around?
They took care of everything the same time.
Okay. Now, before we get into that, let me go back with regard to the knife. You're having a play date over at their house, essentially, right?
Yes.
You and your brothers and sisters.
Right.
And you went in a garage and you saw this knife first.
Yes. Well, I wasn't by myself.
Yeah, I know Mr. Toledo was with you.
Right.
And you grabbed it and then he took it from you. And he showed it, put it away, correct?
Put it right back, yes.
And you said, hey, this is really cool. This is a cool looking knife.
Right.
Now, with regard to the news, were you sitting down watching news yourself, or did your mom or another adult or another person say, hey, come look at this?
In regards to what?
When you saw the stuffed animals on the news?
Oh, no, it was me and my mother looking at the news together.
So you were just watching news as you normally would?
Right.
And do you recall how long that news clip was?
No.
Was it very short, do you think?
I think it was just kind of a run through of the situation because it was still new.
So you saw these items on the news from a helicopter, I believe, probably?
I believe there was footage.
Okay, all right. Now, if you don't know how they got into the dumpsters, do you?
No.
You don't know if Mr. Toledo put them in there or someone else put them in there?
No.
And you don't know when they were placed in there?
I do not.
And you don't know when they were taken out of Talia's bedroom, do you?
I do not.
And you don't know if they were taken out of Talia's bedroom by Talia or Yesenia or someone else?
I do not.
If Mr. Toledo told law enforcement that he had these stuffed animals in a bag that he was going to donate or give away, would that surprise you?
Very much so.
But if he said that to law enforcement, you would have no reason to doubt that, would you?
I would.
So you don't know if these animals were going to be donated to Goodwill at all, do you?
No, I do not.
And you don't know if it was part of a reorganization of Talia's bedroom and her toys or anything, a clean out maybe?
No.
But it could have been, correct?
Could have been.
No further questions.
Any redirect? No, Your Honor. All right, thank you. May the witness be excused?
She may.
All right,
Yes, Judge, you may be excused.
you may step down. All right, ladies and
So
gentlemen.
there's one of the dear friends of the victim, Yesenia Suarez, talking about Suarez being an aunt figure in her life, someone she really looked up to, spoke a lot about. And look, I mean, this is just more that could point potentially to a death penalty conviction, because part of the tactic here, and I think the state played it very well, is to sort of deflect any of the misdeeds of the victim here. You know, she's wrapped up in affairs, this, that, and the
Well,
other thing.
I don't know that that's
and trying to
mitigating.
demonize the, well, not in a true sense of whether or not the guy's going to get the death penalty, but it's like the state did engage in a campaign here to try to make the victim and the kids look as absolutely as innocent as possible. The
Well,
kids were.
Come on, Aaron. They are innocent, aren't they? The kids are totally innocent. This woman, look, this isn't, you know, a country that punishes adultery by death. You don't have that right to kill your adulterous spouse.
Well, I'm not defending him. I'm just saying that it's an and the peanut gallery is chuckling at that comment a little bit behind me, but you know, it's you know, the defendant said he snapped, and if you go through the text messages, it's clear that there's a little bit of egging here on her perspective as well, even though she told police that she was in fear of this guy. So she's in fear of the guy, but then she's needling him through text messages and sort of continuing to rub it in that she wants.
But that doesn't vitiate the fact that this guy committed egregious crimes in a very horrific fashion, has showed no remorse. He's accepted partial responsibility, at least for the murder of his wife. He has still, at this point, never accepted responsibility for the murder of the children. And look, as far as mitigating to avoid the death penalty, he's got to accept responsibility. He's got to show remorse. He's got to show some of the more sympathetic sides of his life story.
You know, does it make any sense if he somehow accepts responsibility at this point after having denied it to this point?
Well, look, until he's convicted, there is the presumption of innocence. So he doesn't really have to accept responsibility until he's ready to either plead guilty.
Yeah, but isn't that playing both edges of the sword? I mean, I get that there's a legal presumption of innocence, but from the court of public opinion, looking in from the outside, the guy says he didn't do it by pleading not guilty, okay? And then now at this point, he's supposed to basically bow down and say, oh yes, I was the guilty one all along,
this
please
is why
save my life.
I'm against trying people in the court of public opinion. It's what we have courts for, it's what we have lawyers for, and I'd be out of a job if we did that routinely.
But your job is inconsequential to the truth here, Ken Belkin. I mean, let's
Well,
you know,
I wouldn't go that far.
does it look good when the defendant says, you know, and I didn't say that your job and the truth were completely separate things. I'm just saying that the truth can exist independent of Ken Belkin or Aaron Keller or anybody else.
It usually does.
Does it? No, that's hogwash, and you know it. So, I mean, doesn't it look bad for the guy to go through all of this saying, oh, it's the neighbor, it's not me, it's somebody else, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, at least on the charges that we're really up against here.
Yeah.
And then turning around and saying, now he's expected to basically say he did it, he's sorry for it, he didn't mean it, this, that, and the other thing, to try to mitigate the upshot of what's happened.
Look, the way our sentencing works in this society, if you're remorseful, if you show acceptance of responsibility, if you can lay out a case that you're more or less a victim of circumstance that led you to this point in your life, the court will show some, restraint in their sentence of you.
Well, that was what I was getting into before, victim of circumstance thing. I mean, he's back and forth in these heated text messages.
That's not the circumstance that you're a victim of. I mean, if this guy had, parents incarcerated at a young age, history of traumatic abuse that he experienced maybe growing up, something like that. That's what I mean, victim of circumstance. The fact that he killed his wife for sending a few nasty texts and having an affair, that you're no victim there. The wife is the victim there.
Well, look, I mean, when you go through the text messages, at least I'm just sitting here saying, look, someone needs to separate these people now. And of course, nobody did, because when she makes a domestic violence call, he doesn't get arrested.
Well, this is a big problem.
Well, we've been over that time and time again. And the next case we're going to be covering coming up here on Law News has got some of these similar elements, and it's in the same state. I want to get into that in a minute because we're in the midst of talking about the Toledo case. And I also want to mention, we're also following here at LawNewz, and especially on LawNewz.com, the documents, the serious charges leveled against Paul Manafort and Rick Gates and the Trump campaign. They were just in federal court. They entered not guilty pleas. So here's where this is probably going to go. I mean, is that evidence, Ken, that they're not really interested in cooperating with this in any way?
Well, hold on. They've entered a not guilty plea at this stage. Probably the government is going to use these charges. Look, when the federal government, this is not like state criminal cases. When federal prosecutors indict, they have an extraordinarily high success rate. First of all, they build their cases over a series of months, years. It's not like state cases. And they don't indict unless they've got a pretty airtight case. And they're probably going to squeeze them through this indictment to get them to cooperate. This is a very common tactic used by federal prosecutors. They always get people to cooperate. Now look, these people can plead not guilty all they want. The fact of the matter is less than 5% of federal criminal cases go to trial. And of that 5% that go to trial, the federal government has about a 97% conviction rate.
So the chance of them slipping through the cracks is possible, but it's extremely low.
It's extremely low. I think there's something more here. You're talking about this guy laundered $18 million. Well, it begs the question, for what purpose was he laundering it? Where was this money coming from? There are more cards to be played.
Exactly.
There might be more charges.
Possibly. We don't know for sure, but it makes me wonder because one of the big items up for discussion today is, okay, look, the indictment against Manafort and Gates, in other words, the former Trump campaign chairman and his associate, doesn't really get into the gravamen that we thought that it might get into, or at least that a lot of observers thought it might get into. It gets into almost this kind of side issue of money laundering related to lobbying in the Ukraine. So, he's got some activity in the Ukraine as alleged. And basically, this is a complaint that says, look, the crux of it is that you were profiting off something and didn't properly report the income in the United States.
Yeah, he made a lot of money.
And of course, $18 million is the
didn't want to
number
pay taxes on it.
Yeah, okay, so he's got these shell corporations set up and like other jurisdictions, and he's moving money all over the world. That's the accusation, okay? But and of course, one of my colleagues here at LawNewz said first thing this morning, it sounds like the Al Capone case. They get the guy on tax evasion. Federal income taxes are a powerful tool for prosecutors. That's sort of the direction that this thing is headed, at least with relation to what we know right now against these two.
Question is, can they tie it to Trump? And the elephant in the room, Article 2 of our Constitution gives the president virtually unlimited pardon powers in federal criminal cases. He can pardon these people.
He could, but look, when would that happen? What would the timing of it be? Because in order to get a pardon, you kind of have to have a conviction.
No, he can pardon once the charges are levied against them. He can pardon at this point. I don't think he's going to. It looks horrible.
But it triggers a presumption of guilt. So then, what if there's a concomitant state law claim?
Well, look, he can't pardon in state matters.
He can't, but if there's an insinuation of guilt at the federal level.
But I don't think any state would have jurisdiction over this because it involves foreign entities. So it would have to be federal criminal case. But
state tax returns, I don't know.
They can get him on state tax evasion. Good luck with that. It's only going to go so far. And really, we know what the end game is: impeach Trump. That's the end game. That's the only way to get to the goal line here. And maybe they can try, if the Republicans in Congress had a backbone, they can use this indictment of his former campaign manager as a potential reason to impeach.
It's been said on LawNewz, it's been said almost everywhere else at this point that, okay, Manafort, Gates, you've got this situation, it doesn't look good on its face, but a lot of people are more worried about this Trump foreign policy advisor, George Papadopoulos, and because that admission of guilt from him points the finger a lot more squarely at what was going on directly with the Trump administration, and in some ways the president himself.
See, you'd think that. I take a different opinion, is that the fact that this guy has already pled guilty of lying to the FBI means the federal government doesn't really have much leverage over him to get him to cooperate and give more information. He's already pled guilty. The only thing that could possibly mitigate his offense would be at sentencing if he was to cooperate. And I don't think, this is probably a first-time offense for this guy. He's probably not looking at an egregious sentence.
Well, he did provide as part of this. Okay, this is Papadopoulos. He did provide this admission, and it says specifically in the top of the document, this is not everything, but it is some of everything. Okay, so what else is out there? All right. You've got meetings in London. You've got meetings with a relative of Vladimir Putin. You've got attempts to set up meetings between Trump and Putin themselves. You've got Russian promises of dirt on Hillary Clinton. You've got lying to the FBI, and that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yes, you've got
in that
what
document.
this guy did.
Okay, yeah.
But you don't have it tied to anyone else as of yet.
Well, he's basically admitting that he was trying to loop all these threads together of setting up contacts between the Trump administration
But it
and
doesn't
Russia.
mean that the Trump campaign or administration knowingly allowed him to do this. They would have to
Responding
present
on
evidence of that.
Okay, so, well, he's a member of the campaign, and the list of admissions specifically says this is not everything. So what else is there?
Look, I was a campaign volunteer for Barack Obama. If I had gotten caught, smoking a joint on the streets of New York City, Barack Obama's campaign for re-election certainly would not be liable for that. This guy can be acting independently, and some of his actions, his independent actions, could be criminal actions. It doesn't necessarily prove any collusion.
Well, with Papadopoulos, it sounds to me almost like what we would see in state court, where somebody basically admits to one thing to starve off sentences on another. So the question is, again, what else is there? The document specifically says there's something else there.
Well, that remains to be seen. But as of right now, nothing that they've presented shows that the administration or the campaign knowingly allowed him to do any of this stuff.
Well, some people are saying it might be another tip of the iceberg thing.
And let me be clear, I am no fan of this administration, but I can't divorce myself from the reality. I am a criminal defense attorney, so I have to look at the facts and try and, find that reasonable doubt.
I'm about as apolitical moderate as they come, which I know is rare these days, but that just happens to be me. So when all of you folks at home are thinking about trying to put party affiliations on the lower thirds, Ken, Barack Obama campaign volunteer, Aaron Keller, independent, journalist, you name it. So we've got that settled though now, Ken.
Well, more or less, more or less.
Okay, so that's what's going on with relation to that case. We've got a lot of great articles up on LawNewz.com, so check them out. Some good analysis there. Trying to keep things as apolitical as possible, but this is one of these situations where the law and politics meet. Dan Abrams, our founder, has already tweeted out, hey, look, does anybody want objective legal analysis anymore? Or is this just degenerating already into a situation where the conservatives and the liberals are going to look in these things to see what best goes to each side's position, and then try to figure out what the law ought to be in the middle of it. So look, we have indictments. We've got not guilty pleas out of Manafort and Gates very, very recently this afternoon, and an admission to some crimes from a Trump policy advisor in the foreign policy realm. We're continuing to keep an eye on that situation. It's been developing since I guess before the election, but it's really blown up this morning, so keep an eye on that. We're going to continue listening to testimony in the Toledo case, though, because we have some testimony from another friend of the victims here, and someone who also knew the defendant, Luis Toledo. Her name is Sabrina Newell. Let's listen to that now.
Did you witness arguments between the two of them?
Not in the beginning. Towards
Did you witness arguments between the two of them?
Not in the beginning. Towards the end.
Okay, well, talk to us a little bit about that. When did you begin to see, we actually witnessed them arguments and stuff?
In towards September, October.
Toward the end when she disappeared?
Yes.
What were these arguments about?
Just things of him not keeping up with the house, not doing his part.
What was Yesenia, what was she doing at the time in terms of work, school?
Work in school.
Okay.
And also taking care, of things with the kids.
Okay. And what was Luis Toledo doing at the time?
To my knowledge, he was just a stay-home dad.
Okay. He was not working at all?
No.
Were you aware that he went to school?
He didn't start school till later on.
Okay. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about, or have you talk to us a little bit about sort of the kind of the roles that they were playing at the time. Was it your observation during this period of time that, Yesenia was sort of this person who, demanded that, that Luis Toledo sort of serve her and the children sort of in that role?
Overall.
No. I didn't see it like that. Like I said, I'm a stay-home mom as well. And when you're in a relationship, you have certain things that you guys pull together to make a family. And to me, it was more of, that was his job, needless to say, is to, take care of home. You're not doing anything, you're not going to school, not working, you put your part in, My husband, he works all day, all night to support a family. I make sure he has a clean house, clean clothes, dinner cooked, and, my kid's homework is done. I'm not leaving that for him to do,
So your observations of their relationship was sort of the flip side.
Yes.
Where Yesenia was working, going to school, Luis Toledo was not, and so she had some expectations of him concerning the house, the children, and sort of helping her pull the weight in their marriage.
Yes.
Were there arguments that you observed concerning the children's homework, their grades, him playing video games, things of that nature?
Yeah.
Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
She would just be upset, like, why isn't their homework done? Or, why is their laundry sitting here? Like, what have you been doing all day? Playing these video games? And, she would let him know about himself. But, sometimes you have to, tell men and, hey, what's going on? I mean, I have slack days, I know, but at the same time, if it continues too much, you need to be told something.
Okay. Toward the end, were there opportunities you had where, and I don't want to get into the content of the conversations, but were there opportunities where Yesenia confided in you her feelings about her relationship with the defendant?
Yes, in October, we had went to get my daughter a homecoming dress in Orlando, and
okay, and again, I don't want to get into the content.
Okay, sorry. Yes, yes, she did. She did tell me she was unhappy.
Okay, so she was not happy.
Yes.
And that was an observation that you made of her demeanor during that particular time, that she was not happy with her relationship with Luis Toledo.
Yes. I was working at a restaurant, and she was my hostess.
And what did you do at the restaurant?
I was a server, and I met her one night when she first got on, and I was like, hey, you want to hang out after work? And ever since then, we were like inseparable.
What restaurant was it that you
It was
worked?
Chevy's in Altamont Springs, Florida.
And you said that was in
2002, 2003.
And so you two of you sort of hit it off immediately.
Automatic.
And you were inseparable.
Yes.
How would you describe your relationship from that point forward?
Like a sister, like a younger sister.
What were some of the kind of things you did together?
We did everything: shopping, eating, just hanging out, doing facials, straightening hair, cutting hair, going out, just being young.
How often would you do things together?
Almost every day.
Did you have any children at the time?
No.
And what about Yesenia?
No.
At some point during your relationship with Yesenia, did that close relationship change?
What do you, like?
Yeah, did it change for the worse? I mean, were there falling out?
We had a little separation due to other people's ignorance, I guess you could say. And we just had a breakup, basically. The only way I could explain it. But I never forgot about her. And I actually ended up running into her sister in December of 2012, I think it was. And that's when we encountered with Jasenia at Burlington at the Seminole Town Center Mall. And then the next day she came to my house, and it was like nothing ever happened. Like, I opened my door and we just hugged, and we picked up where we left off. I ended up meeting Toledo that following week, and we hung out at my house, and we had a bonfire, and we just, got to know each other again. And from there on, it was just always on the phone, texting, or, me going over her house, her coming over mine, us meeting up at the restaurant and to eat and just to socialize. And
Now,
kids were always together playing. We would go to the library. We would go to Talia's cheerleading practices, her game.
let me kind of walk back
SeaWorld.
just a little bit.
Aquatic, I'm sorry.
You talked about your children, and of course we know Yesenia had children. At what point in your relationship did you and Yesenia begin to have children?
I want to say it was 2004 is when I had my son, and then right after she ended up having Talia as well. We both got pregnant at the same time, kind of just that best friend thing. You follow along, the same path.
And so did that begin to happen prior to you guys having a falling out?
No, that was after. Me and her had a falling out years later after the kids were, I want to say, like 4 years old or so.
Okay, so
5 years old.
So you began to have children, and then at some point thereafter is when you kind of had the falling out for a little bit of time, and then you guys got back together.
Yes.
At what point did you meet Luis Toledo?
I met Luis. I actually saw him when she actually met him at a festival that we had went to.
Okay.
There was an altercation that had occurred.
Let me stop you there about that. Did you know him though at that particular point?
No. I met him when he came to my house with her and the kids.
Okay. And was it shortly thereafter that you and Yesenia had the falling out?
I met. I'm sorry. So I'm just going to rewind. I met Luis after our falling out when we reunited.
Okay. You saw him though before.
I saw him before.
And then you met him sort of officially after you and Yesenia rekindled your relationship.
Yes.
And at that point, were they married?
Yes.
Now, tell me a little bit about you. I know you said that when you and Yesenia sort of rekindled your relationship, you described it as you picked up sort of where you left off. It was like you were never apart from each other. Talk to us a little bit about your relationship with Yesenia from that moment forward.
It was, like I said, it was basically where we were inseparable again. We hung out all the time. She would text me, we would call. She invited me to certain things like Thalia's cheerleading events. We were just always together. I don't know how to explain it other than we were inseparable.
How often would you guys get together and do?
All the time. All the time.
Like how many times per week?
I would see her more than...
More testimony from one of the friends who knew the defendant and the family in this case. So, Ken, we know that this is coming up for death penalty hearing starting on Wednesday. We know the defendant has said he just wants to die. And I'm curious to see where this is going to go from here. I mean, it would seem to me that the prediction would be, as we've been saying, that this probably is going to result in a death penalty verdict, conviction. Well, he's been convicted, but a death penalty sentence at this point.
I could also see them being like, hey, he wants to die so bad, screw him. We're sending him to jail for life. No possibility of parole. He doesn't get off that easy.
Well, that's keeping someone alive the ultimate punishment.
I think so in many ways. You look, if this is his preferred
Yeah, but wait a minute, Ken,
sentence,
the jury doesn't know that he said that to the judge. Is the jury going to find that out?
I mean,
It
the
was said
jury
after
knows
the jury
that
took
he
off.
committed suicide, tried to commit suicide. They know that this guy, you know, if he's going to waive his right to counsel during this phase, they know what his angle is and what he wants.
Look, we've got another case that's going to be coming up this week here on the Law News Network. It's the Adam Matos case. This is also a Florida case, and as the situation may be, this sounds vaguely familiar. It sounds almost like the Toledo case in a couple of respects. So here's the deal. We've got a defendant. He's facing 4 counts of first-degree murder, capital cases. Here's why. Investigators in Florida say he killed his ex-girlfriend. Her name is Megan Brown. Her new boyfriend named Nicholas Leonard. And also Megan Brown, the ex-girlfriend's father and mother, okay? And the evidence seems pretty damaging based on the complaints. I was reading through them again this morning. You have a crime that happened after a report of some kind of a domestic incident between Megan Brown, the ex-girlfriend, and the defendant, okay? Sounds a lot like the Toledo case. You've got a report of a domestic violence situation at the end of August 2014, and you get the bodies found on September 4th. It's not the very next day, but it's still really, really close. And we got into this big discussion in the Toledo case about whether or not the domestic violence laws are strong enough in Florida, because about half of the states require some sort of a mandatory arrest when of a domestic violence situation. Florida is not one of them. And look, different states have different mandatory arrest laws. Many states say it should only be a mandatory arrest if there is a restraining order violation, okay, which may not have helped in this situation. But other states just say, no, there's reported domestic violence, mandatory cooling off period, somebody is getting carted off to jail.
Well, look, in New York, where I practice, we have, you know, a lot of defense attorneys are of the opinion that there's so many domestic violence arrests that are just baseless. A lot of people get arrested for no reason on domestic violence charges. And to a certain extent, I agree. I've had a number of clients that did nothing wrong. They were just arrested on the basis of whack allegations of domestic violence. Now, you know, Florida does not have this mandatory arrest policy when domestic violence allegations are made. They do not have that policy. They can issue a desk appearance ticket, they can write a report, but they will not be taking that person into custody. You know, for better or worse, this is the balance that they struck. They'd rather not arrest all these people needlessly, but the downside to that is you have situations like this where something was reported, an arrest could have been made, and maybe potentially a life could have been saved.
The legislature gets elected to write the laws. Is this one of these situations where the legislature in Florida needs to take a little bit better study of this? And look, I'm not saying that 2 cases make a trend in the big scheme of things, but if I were sitting on a committee that dealt with criminal law or the judiciary in Florida, I'd be, based on having Toledo and then now this case, I would want some statistics to say, hey, look, how many times do we get a report of domestic violence where somebody ends up dead within a month?
Yeah,
and I'd want my legislative research arm to start crunching those facts.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And by the way, this is exactly the calculus that went into it when states like New York changed the law. You know, look, there are a lot of crimes that are not mandatory arrests. For instance, you know, assault, not always a mandatory arrest. They can issue a desk appearance ticket with a court date a month later. However, when it happens in the context of a domestic violence situation where the people, you know, they live together or they have an intimate relationship or they're related by blood, then it becomes a mandatory arrest. And there's a reason for that. They feel that those situations are more prone to spiral out of control and lead to a loss of life.
Well, look, I think that the law would have, and this is my opinion, okay, because the laws are written in different ways. I think mandatory arrest if you violate a restraining order or some judicial no contact provision. Okay.
Well, that's a given.
You do that, then you know, but the analysis that I've seen of Florida doesn't even have that. And I don't know if the analyses that I were reading were bad, but I would think that they're not, because the American Bar Association is the one that did them. So, or at least it isn't tied into a specific domestic violence provision. And look, I would agree, though, given that there should be some officer discretion. Because if it's some dumb thing or somebody's making a false report and the officer can sniff that out in the wind, somebody shouldn't get arrested based on a false report. But let's talk, okay, here's the thing. In the Toledo case, he shows up at work, he flips out, there are a ton of witnesses to it, okay? That situation is pretty well documented, and we have the sound of the ruckus on a 911
And
call.
absolutely, in New York, he would have been arrested. I've had clients that were arrested for that very same thing.
Okay. That's the Toledo case. Let's listen to what's going on in this Matos case that we're covering as soon as jury selection is complete. They're in the midst of jury selection starting today. We'll be covering it gavel to gavel as soon as it kicks off. But here's what happened in this one. You've got the ex-girlfriend, okay, Megan Brown, calls police and says that the defendant came home asking about her whereabouts. Okay, they've split up. She's dating somebody else. Is he the jealous type? I don't know. It sounds like possibly. He starts demanding her whereabouts, and I'm reading right straight out of the complaint. Okay? Megan reported Adam, the defendant, pushed her against a wall and held a knife to her throat, threatening to kill her.
I mean,
That's
that's
the
assault, attempted assault, menacing, harassment. Come on, you got to take this guy into custody.
Megan reported her son woke up from the yelling, and this is when Adam, the defendant, fled the residence. Now, I don't know what the upshot of that specific incident was, but it sounds to me that there just isn't that much more coming out of it.
I mean, look, he should have been taken into custody. This was, you know, the police discretion in this case was obviously, they made the wrong choice.
Is it one of these situations where the jails are already full?
Look, and that's a problem we have in New York because, look, someone gets mandatory arrest policy, they're arrested on domestic violence charges, at the arraignment, order of protection is issued. Well, what's the first thing that happens when a husband is separated from his wife and had to spend a night in jail because of allegations she made? Well, he's probably going to give her a call or try to return to the marital residence. Then, boom, he's violated the order of protection, gets arrested again for criminal contempt. I was just in the domestic violence part of Nassau County Criminal Court this morning. Very packed courtroom, extremely clogged system we have here. But we do not have spouses and significant others getting murdered at the rates of states that do not have a mandatory arrest policy.
A lot of questions for legislatures to try to figure out here. I just bring this up because I worked in a state where there were very, very strong arrest provisions. There are some people who turn around and say, okay, well, you arrest somebody, they get out on an appearance ticket or they make bail or something. Okay, a relative, a buddy, somebody bails them out, and can the act of making an arrest just aggravate the situation further? You know, once they get out, are they more enraged than they were when they got picked up in the first case?
I don't know.
And then is there an attack?
I tend to think they call jail cells the cooler for a reason. You get run through the system, through central booking, through the arraignment process. You're looking at, in the state of New York, you know, it's a 24-hour process. Other states, it's more than 24 hours. Under federal law, it has to be within 48 hours. So a day, maybe 2 days spent locked up, you know, it's going to cool you out. And then when you get in front of the judge and he admonishes you a little bit and issues an order of protection warning you not to contact this person, you know, you tend to think that maybe you're a little bit more reasonable after having eaten horrible peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and having to use the toilet in front of a room full of men.
Well, you know, I say, look, I think at a minimum, my point is this. I think this is ripe for some kind of legislative analysis, some additional statistics. I wish I had them at my disposal.
I think part of the reason is Florida, it might be a budget thing. They might be, look, they don't really have a high income tax or any income tax down there. They might be concerned that this will overwhelm the court system if they issued a mandatory arrest policy. You know, I think we should be less concerned about clogging the courts than maybe the lives of spouses and significant others that end up murdered. And I say this as a defense attorney.
I could see that concern. And look, you know, I have ringing in my ears the words of a very conservative legislator whom I befriended when I worked in the Midwest. And she said to me many times over again, I can try to legislate all I want, but I can never legislate poor morality or against someone's poor upbringing. If they're going to make bad decisions, I can try to legislate, but I can't stop everything. Well, this is why I wish I had more statistics on this.
Yeah.
Is it just going to is it a bigger problem in Florida? I wonder.
I mean, it would seem to me that there's a reason that states like New York decided on this mandatory arrest in cases of domestic violence. Does it have some unintended side effects? Yes.
From my perspective, it seems to be an increasing trend as well. More and more states seem to be going this way in some matter. And look, I've got a friend who's active in politics in another state, and I've got friends on various sides of the aisle, and I brought this to her attention, said, hey, look, your state doesn't have this, and we're covering these trial, and her jaw just about hit the table and said, I better refer this to somebody. So, they might study it just based on what I'm seeing here happening in a state that's not even their state. I'm really curious to see what's going on. And, look, the report that I have in front of me does not say specifically that he wasn't arrested, but I have to assume that there was not an arrest, because if there was one, it probably would be in here. Maybe not, but I guess there is a chance that he could have been picked up on this. This is the Matos case that we're covering.
Yeah. I mean,
it doesn't say anything about it. So, and then within a couple of days, we've got, bodies being found.
Look, within a couple of days, he probably was not picked up, because
that's what I assume.
If he was picked up, charged, and they disposed of the case in some fashion where it was sealed afterwards, which is a possibility, but not one that's going to happen in a few days' time, especially not in Florida.
Yeah, I think this is 7 or 8 days. So, I've got to count my calendars and try to figure out what happened with this. So